so much to get to. Donald Trump met with Democratic leaders Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries to avert a government shutdown scheduled for October 1st, when the 2026 budget is supposed to kick in. But as usual, there is no budget. Republicans now want to pass a clean, continuing resolution that would temporarily keep spending at current levels so they can come up with a permanent 2026 budget. They want to keep spending at current levels except for additional security given to members of Congress and the Supreme Court. They just want to spend a little extra to make sure the Supreme Court and members of Congress are safe, but not the rest of the country. No talk about bringing back, for example, the assault weapons ban. Democrats want to claw back cuts to Medicaid, food stamps, and subsidies for Obamacare that came down in one big, beautiful bill passed on July 4th. Republicans now accusing Democrats of wanting to shut down the entire government this week in order to provide free health care to undocumented immigrants. What a surprise. Republicans lying. Well, after the meeting between Jeffries and Schumer and Trump, our president posted an AI-generated video calling Schumer and Jeffries woke pieces of dung, but Trump said something worse than dung. I won't repeat it. Not only that, Trump doctored a photo of Hakeem Jeffries, putting him in a Mexican sombrero and a large mustache. I guess this is to suggest that Jeffries wants to give Mexican immigrants free health care. J.D. Vance, who has no problem just lying, is now claiming Democrats want to spend $1.5 trillion on health care for, quote unquote, illegals. Otherwise, they will shut the government down. J.D. Vance is a liar. Haitian immigrants weren't eating cats and dogs, and Democrats aren't threatening to shut the government down unless they get $1.5 trillion on health care for, quote unquote, illegals. Like I said, the government could shut down after midnight. That would be early Wednesday morning. MSNBC has a big report late Monday that the FBI's investigation into border czar Tom Homan taking cash in exchange for lucrative government contracts in a future Trump administration. Well, according to MSNBC, those tapes were way more damning than we first understood. So a week ago, we told you that the FBI caught Tom Homan on tape accepting $50,000 in a brown paper bag, cash, from undercover agents posing as for-profit border security executives looking for government contracts in a future Trump administration. This was an ongoing investigation into Tom Homan. The FBI began keeping tabs on him, especially in the lead up to Trump's return to the Oval Office, to see how Homan would deliver on these promises. We now know that the acting Deputy Attorney General, Emil Bove, early on in the Trump administration this year, shut down that entire investigation looking into Tom Homan. Homan, so far, has not denied taking $50,000 in cash. He just denies it's illegal. I want to know if he declared it on his taxes. So we've got new reporting from MSNBC late Monday that Julian Calderas, who worked with Homan over at ICE during the Obama administration, he became a business associate of Tom Homan's during the Biden administration, as Homan built a consulting business helping for-profit border security firms get government contracts. So it's the revolving door. He leaves ICE, Biden's president, and then he comes back to be the border czar, awarding government contracts to his friends. According to MSNBC, Homan's associate Calderas was caught on tape telling FBI undercover agents that for $1 million, Tom Homan could make government contracts rain down on these executives in a future Trump administration. I will have more on that tomorrow. There are new rumors that seem to be substantiated. It's coming to us from the Daily Mail, not the most reliable, but it's also coming from other sources that Pete Hegseth, our Pentagon chief, is coming completely unglued, screaming at the top of his lungs, pacing frantically during meetings, convening a summit of all our generals to drive home the importance of a warrior culture in our military, depending on his wife to follow up on his orders. She's earned the nickname Yoko Ono because you might remember Yoko Ono was accused by the rest of the Beatles of sticking her nose where it didn't belong. And Pete Hegseth, at the same time, is being accused of openly throwing full-bore childlike temper tantrums practically every day. They're public temper tantrums in front of members of the military. Well, at least he kept his promise during the confirmation hearings that he would give up drinking. This is obviously a man who is white-knuckling it. He gave up drinking. We've also had 5 mass shootings over the course of 24 hours here in the United States. This is from the Mass Shooting Tracker. It's a website. And in a 24-hour period here in the United States, 5 mass shootings. Southport, North Carolina, on the 27th of September, 3 dead, 6 wounded. Sunday, 5 dead, 8 injured in Grand Blanc, Michigan, which also saw the church where the shooting took place go up in flames. 1 dead, 3 injured later that day in New Orleans. Then, same day in Eagle Pass, Texas, 2 dead, 7 injured. And then in Highland Park, Michigan again, 4 injured. In the past, we would talk about the morality of releasing the names of shooters, that it was wrong to give them any publicity. Plus, it encouraged copycats desperate for fame and immortality. Well, those days are over. Now it's devolved into a race to discover the shooter's politics. Which side was he on? And it's usually a he, a white he. Which side was the white he on? The name of the shooter and his politics are immaterial. We should at least wait a month till after people have been buried and the gross rubberneckers who live off this pornography move on. Put a hold on this information as a matter of respect to the families of the victims. And let's just stop trying to figure out their politics. Who cares what the politics is of a shooter? Violence is not violence is the opposite of politics. It's what you resort to when you no longer can make an argument. Which brings me to the Middle East and Donald Trump's disastrous performance on Monday, trying to convince the world he solved Gaza. Now, I hope I'm wrong, but things are about to get even worse in Gaza, and yes, such a thing is possible. That joint announcement from the White House on Monday signaled that Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, he has about as much respect for Trump as Putin does. Israeli airstrikes killed 33 Palestinians in Gaza on Monday. Also, on Monday, Israeli airstrikes killed 1 person in southern Lebanon. Donald Trump claiming that he's conducted what he insists are high-level negotiations on a post-war Gaza. But there can't be a post-war Gaza until the war ends. Trump has consulted with everybody on what Gaza will look like once the fighting stops. Everyone that is, except the Palestinians. Trump held that rambling joint press conference on Monday with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. A clearly exhausted Trump took gratuitous swipes at Joe Biden while attempting to convince the world that a lot is going on when, in fact, his words signified nothing but bluster and empty promises. Trump rambled. He allowed Netanyahu to heap false praise on him, while at the same time assuring the world that the fighting in Gaza ends when Netanyahu says it ends. You may hate Netanyahu, but he has been clear from day one. There will be no negotiations when it comes to the destruction of Hamas. He says it will be destroyed, eliminated, that there's nothing to talk about. He also says there will not be a Palestinian state, and he's never deviated from those promises. The joint press conference, which the White House billed as a huge announcement, was delayed for more than an hour on Monday. That's never a good sign. Trump and Netanyahu said nothing. They filled time and then refused to take questions during their so-called joint press conference. In other words, Trump's announcement regarding Gaza was as much an actual breakthrough for peace as it was an actual press conference. Netanyahu's trip to Washington, the meeting, the announcement were all literally the definition of exercises in futility. Again, Netanyahu is the prime minister of Israel who has said from day one, no two-state solution, no Palestinian state, no Hamas. Trump projects his dishonesty onto Netanyahu. He thinks Netanyahu is lying about Gaza, lying about Hamas, and it's all just a negotiating ploy. It's his opening bid. But Netanyahu is not Trump. Trump threatens to do a lot of things to get people to fear him. Netanyahu does a lot of things to get people to fear him. That's the difference. Trump is a fool who only deals with the reality he conjured in his addled brain. He is not equipped to deal with Bibi Netanyahu or Putin because those two guys don't care what Donald Trump thinks. They don't have to pretend Trump isn't stupid, so they walk all over him, especially Netanyahu. Trump insisted Monday that peace was at hand. He peacocked like he was Jimmy Carter announcing the Camp David Accords, but what he really said on Monday, whether he even knew he said it, was, Benjamin Netanyahu has my full blessing to continue the slaughter in Gaza, to finish off Hamas any way he sees fit, no matter how many civilians die, because I'm completely powerless. It was one of the low points so far this year for Donald Trump. His stupidity, gullibility, and fragile ego were all on full display. With J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio in the audience listening to this orange blob of narcissistic personality disorder in the throes of Alzheimer's and tertiary syphilis, how could they not look at each other and say, it's 25th Amendment time? During Trump's speech, if you want to call it that, Trump admitted his monumental plan that he thinks will win him a Nobel Peace Prize. That plan has not been shown to Hamas, but he hopes Hamas will agree to all of it. Otherwise, they deserve everything that's about to come their way. Ah, yes, the art of the deal. because everyone knows that's exactly how all successful negotiations work. Propose a plan that calls for the complete and utter destruction of the people you're supposed to be dealing with, and then act surprised when your negotiating partner, in this case Hamas, refuses to accept it. Agree to your own annihilation or we'll annihilate you. See, that's not a peace plan. That's a blank check issued to Benjamin Netanyahu to use American weapons any way he sees fit. Trump's plan, if you want to call it that, was put together by Steve Witkoff, a real estate attorney from Manhattan, and Trump's son-in-law, the genius Jared Kushner, whose real estate business would have gone completely belly up had Donald Trump not gotten elected president in 2016, so Kushner could leverage his connections for a bailout from oil-rich nations in the Middle East. The New York Times reported over the weekend that Steve Witkoff, he has a son named Alex, and he's been busy pitching investments to sovereign wealth funds, including Qatar, while his father, Steve Witkoff, is working with Qatar to negotiate some sort of peace deal in Gaza. I know it's hard to believe, but there was a time when this was considered not just unseemly, not just unethical, but illegal. Those days are over. We're talking now about people steeped in the moral hazards of Manhattan real estate, where there is no morality or legality, only the risk of not being powerful enough to make these questions go away. It's all about power and influence, not morality, not legality. That is Manhattan real estate. Trump literally sees Gaza and the Palestinians as tenants in a real estate venture who are in the way. Tenants living in a rent-controlled building that he wants to tear down and turn into a luxury co-op. Steve Witkoff, Donald Trump, Jared Kushner, they only know Manhattan real estate. They don't understand what negotiation even means. All they're able to muster is, this is my last and final offer. You lack the resources to beat me in court, so you either take what I'm giving or you live out on the streets. These people don't care about tenants. They see them as subhuman, and that's exactly how they also see the Palestinians living in Gaza. They're just in the way. They're just in the way of accomplishing bigger things. And by bigger things, I mean racking up enormous debt on an enormous eyesore that's 3/4 empty, but it doesn't matter because this was always about laundering money for Russian oligarchs and Latin American drug kingpins. So, despite Trump's hype, his lies, or his peace plan, for Trump and the people he surrounds himself with, it's not the art of the deal. It's the art of death threats and intimidation. There's only what Netanyahu, Kushner, Steve Witkoff, and Trump want. And Trump is now telling Hamas, take it or leave it. And if you leave it, you only have yourself to blame. That's basically what he said on Monday. Trump's plan does call for a two-state solution under certain conditions, but Trump, during the joint press conference, let slip that Benjamin Netanyahu would never agree to a two-state solution. Monday's Little Big announcement served as a reminder of just how dangerous Trump is, how ill-equipped he is to deal with real-world problems. He cannot solve Ukraine. He cannot solve the Middle East. FEMA's response to the Texas flash floods of July 4th was a disaster in and of itself. He continues to throw gas-soaked rags onto the rhetorical flames following the assassination of Charlie Kirk, making that tragedy even bloodier. Trump is a fool a petty, dangerous fool. His one big, beautiful bill is destroying health care and our nation's social safety net for the poor and the working poor. In fact, so much so that for the first time in modern political history, Democrats are starting to believe they'll be seen as the adults in the room this time by shutting down the government on October 1st. It used to be Democrats were the adults for keeping the government open. Now, many people, including former Labor Secretary under Clinton, Robert Reich, many people believe shutting down this government is the mature and patriotic thing to do. So yeah, Trump is a joke, but it's not a funny joke. 1 million people dead because he crapped the bed on COVID, the single worst response to COVID per capita, as well as in sheer numbers compared to the rest of the industrialized world. Early in his first administration, Trump left Puerto Rico to die after Hurricane Maria. He couldn't care less about Puerto Rico because Puerto Ricans don't vote in presidential or congressional elections. And it wasn't until Biden took office, nearly 4 years later, that things began to return to normal in Puerto Rico. And that was a foreshadowing of what was to come should the American people be so stupid to give this idiot the keys to the Oval Office again. That joint press conference with Netanyahu on Monday reminded anyone who cares enough to pay attention that this imbecile is incredibly dangerous because he can't govern. Again, it's okay to be stupid. It's not okay to be stupid while piloting a fully loaded 737. And that's what we've got right now. There's going to be an economic meltdown. There always is. There's going to be a natural disaster. There have already been several natural disasters this year, and FEMA is not responding. Monday's joint press conference reminded all of us that Trump, along with his menagerie of opportunistic, incompetent sycophants, they don't have the slightest clue when it comes to even understanding what the problem is before that problem turns into a tragedy. All Trump and his cabinet know how to do is say, nobody could have ever seen how bad this thing was going to be. And actually, it's not so bad. You're just listening to the fake media. You saw how he responded to the flash floods. Nobody could imagine that they would be this high, that the water would be this high. Nobody could imagine that there'd be a virus as bad as COVID. Yes, they did. They did. It is generally agreed in the West that the oil-rich nation of Qatar will play a major role in mediating some kind of ceasefire between Israel and the leaders of Hamas. It is also generally agreed inside Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition government that there will never be a ceasefire until the leaders of Hamas and Hamas itself are totally eliminated. Again, as far as Netanyahu is concerned, and he has made this clear repeatedly, Israel will not negotiate with Hamas. Israel will destroy it. That's why he ordered that airstrike in Doha, in Qatar, an airstrike on Hamas's lead negotiator. Do you consider that negotiating when you're trying to kill the lead negotiator for Hamas? How much clearer does Benjamin Netanyahu have to make it to Donald Trump? He just tried to kill Hamas's lead negotiator. So why would you think this man has any intention of sitting down at the bargaining table to iron out an agreement with the very same people he's trying to kill? What we have right now is a Trump White House in complete denial over who they're dealing with vis-a-vis Benjamin Netanyahu. He keeps saying no Palestinian state and Hamas must be destroyed. As long as Netanyahu is the prime minister, there will never be a ceasefire. There will never be a peace deal because as far as Netanyahu is concerned, Hamas will not exist in post-war Gaza, and post-war Gaza will not result in a Palestinian state. Period. Period. The rest is noise. Donald Trump is a pathological liar. He doesn't even know what the truth is. The truth is only what makes Trump feel better about himself that day. So, again, here is the truth. And I'm not making a value judgment here. I'm stating the truth about Benjamin Netanyahu. And by stating this simple truth, we can all stop wasting time. Here is the truth. After October 7th, 2023, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, decided Hamas would meet the same fate as the Japanese after Pearl Harbor: complete and unapologetic destruction. On October 7th, in Benjamin Netanyahu's mind, the Palestinians were automatically disqualified to get their own homeland, something Netanyahu has been clearly against as far back as when he was ginning up the political violence that led to the assassination of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. The Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Rabin, signed the Oslo Accords with PLO leader Yasser Arafat, thereby setting up the framework for an independent Palestinian state. This was back when Clinton was president. Netanyahu has been against a two-state solution for more than 30 years, and so have the people who keep electing Netanyahu prime minister. Since 1996, Netanyahu, off and on, has been prime minister for a total of 17 years. He has never been shy about telling Israeli voters or anyone else who will listen that as long as he's in charge of Israel, there will be no Palestinian state. Again, here's the truth. If you say you support a Palestinian state, if you say you're for a two-state solution, then you cannot say you support Benjamin Netanyahu. So cut the garbage. Netanyahu is not going to be the Nixon goes to China prime minister, the guy who is so anti-Palestinian, only he can be trusted by the Israelis to negotiate a two-state solution. That was General Ariel Sharon, who, with sufficient Palestinian blood on his hands, became the one Israeli prime minister who might have been trusted to somehow forge the beginning stages of a sovereign Palestinian state. But he suffered a massive stroke in 2006 and was forced to leave office. I've always felt that had he not had that stroke, that somehow he might have been able to get something resembling a Palestinian state. Netanyahu is not a Nixon goes to China prime minister. He's a Nixon drops an atomic bomb on China prime minister. So on Monday, Netanyahu said a lot of things to placate Trump. But in the end, Netanyahu doesn't answer to Trump, to the United States. He doesn't even answer to the families of the hostages or the Israeli people. Netanyahu answers only to his political survival, and that's entirely contingent upon keeping the war with Hamas going while appeasing the far-right extremists who make up his ruling coalition. For example, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called the Prime Minister of Qatar on Monday at Donald Trump's urging. Trump listened in on that call, a call where Netanyahu apologized for Israel's airstrike earlier this month, that airstrike where he failed to take out Hamas's top negotiator. 6 people were killed, including a Qatari soldier. Netanyahu made the apology in a call from the White House Monday where he was meeting with Trump. Again, right now, there is no talking to Hamas without Qatar. Netanyahu doesn't want to talk to Hamas. Those days are over, as far as he's concerned. It's why he launched that airstrike on Qatar to kill Palestinians' lead negotiator. But on Monday, he apologized to Qatar because what does it matter, right? Throw a bone to Trump, make him feel important. You talked me into it, Donald. I'll apologize now. It's the rule of Silicon Valley. It's easier to ask for permission. It's easier to ask for forgiveness than it is permission. Back home, and this is what Netanyahu faces back home, his apology on Monday was immediately met with attacks by members of his far-right coalition government. Israel's finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, accused Netanyahu of being submissive, calling Netanyahu's apology to Qatar a disgrace, and pointing out that Qatar deserved to be attacked because it funds Hamas. What Israel's finance minister conveniently left out is that Qatar funds Hamas only with Netanyahu's blessing. Netanyahu told Qatar, go ahead, fund Hamas. This was years ago. Netanyahu openly admits he encouraged Qatar to send money to Hamas in Gaza so that Netanyahu could divide and conquer the Palestinian people. More on that later. You can Google that. That's a fact. Itamar Ben-Gvir, Israel's Minister of National Security, also a far-right extremist, who on Monday also attacked Netanyahu for apologizing to Qatar. Ben-Gvir called the air attack on Qatar moral and the right thing to do. Both Gvir and Smotrich are calling for the annexation of the West Bank, taking all of it back and erasing any hope of a Palestinian state. They say they want to bury the idea of Palestinian sovereignty. They are very consistent. It's not their opening bid. This is not a negotiating ploy. Again, Trump did say over the weekend he would stop Israel from annexing the West Bank. But let's be clear here. Netanyahu's coalition government wants to take back all of the West Bank. And those are the people Netanyahu answers to. Netanyahu has their support because it was Netanyahu's speeches in the 90s, his stochastic terrorism, that led to the assassination of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, who was pushing for a two-state solution. That's not me telling you this. Those are the words of Yitzhak Rabin's widow, Leah Rabin, who said she would hold Netanyahu personally responsible for her husband's death until the day she died. Speaking of Netanyahu and the people surrounding him, Leah Rabin said, quote, "Surely I blame them. If you ever heard their speeches, you would understand what I mean. They were very, very violent in their expressions," unquote. So we've been over the meaning of stochastic terrorism, which is basically politicians throwing so much heated language into the public square, it's only a matter of time until one of their followers commits an act of violence. Now even Republicans are talking about stochastic terrorism. Netanyahu only answers to the people who comprise his coalition government. Without them, his government collapses, and he then must face legal consequences for both corruption and completely crapping the bed on October 7th. Eventually, Netanyahu has to explain how Hamas was able to breach one of the most closely guarded corridors in the world. Trump on Monday insisting there's a proposal on the table, while leaders of Hamas are saying, we've never seen it. After Trump's announcement, the Prime Minister of Qatar sat down with Hamas's leaders, who promised to review the plan and get back to everyone if Bibi Netanyahu doesn't kill them first. It is generally agreed that Hamas will never accept this plan. And if they did, then Netanyahu wouldn't accept it. He would find a reason to say Hamas is holding up the negotiations. So, everything, unfortunately, suggests things will get even deadlier as the final battle inside Gaza City between Israel and the several thousand remaining Hamas fighters takes place coming up on the second anniversary of October 7th. What we're hearing coming out of the UN and the White House are several proposals for a post-war Gaza. One proposal, and this is coming from Trump, calls for Gaza to be ruled temporarily by a committee possibly led by former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, who might be the one who oversees some sort of international military force comprised primarily of soldiers from Arab countries. And who better, who is more trusted in the Arab world than Tony Blair, who said in 2003 to George W. Bush, "I will not go along with you on this illegal, trumped-up invasion of Iraq." I mean, he was a hero to the Arab world, to the Arab street, Tony Blair, when he said, "No, I will not be a part of this. There are no weapons of mass destruction. They were not behind 9/11. I will not." Oh, right. That didn't happen. So you're going to put Tony Blair in charge of an international military force comprised primarily of Arab soldiers. Good thinking there, Donald. Another proposal coming from Emmanuel Macron would be French peacekeepers working alongside a multinational army made up of primarily Arab soldiers. So those two proposals suggest that Israel would be more amenable to Arab peacekeepers in Gaza only if they're overseen by white European leaders representing the former colonial powers in that region. Giving France or Great Britain temporary authority over Gaza would no doubt reinforce an idea held by many in the Middle East and people on college campuses throughout the United States that Israel is and always has been an extension of European colonial expansion in the Middle East. Pretty flagrant so far. So again, sadly, I don't see fighting in Gaza ending anytime soon. If you somehow could take Hamas, Benjamin Netanyahu, and the 700,000 Israeli settlers in the West Bank out of this equation, then I think you can stop the killing. To put it another way, except for the massive head wound, Mrs. Lincoln, your husband is doing just fine. If you take off the table that gunshot to the temple, rendering your husband lifeless, Mrs. Lincoln, then I'm going to tell you he's on his way to a full recovery. Except for Hamas, the Israeli settlers in the West Bank, and Netanyahu, there is some forward movement. I do think we have the entire Arab community, all 22 members of the Arab League, on board not only a two-state solution, which means recognizing Israel's right to exist, but also, remarkably, a complete repudiation of Hamas. And for the first time since Trump returned to the Oval Office, he is at least pretending for the first time this year to support a two-state solution. That's in his plan. A two-state solution, something he seemed to have abandoned this year, with Mike Huckabee, our new ambassador to Israel, saying If the Palestinians wanted their own state, it would have to be carved out of Arab land, but it's not going to be the West Bank or Gaza. And our Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, seemed to agree. But now with this new plan, Trump seems to be suggesting that he's open to a two-state solution. And he said last week that he would oppose Netanyahu annexing the entire West Bank. By the way, a two-state solution has been more or less America's official policy since the first Bush administration. Again, if you're for a two-state solution, you cannot be for Benjamin Netanyahu. If you're for a two-state solution, you can't be for Hamas or the Israeli settlers, all 700,000 of them in the West Bank. Again, I can't stress how important this is, that we're now seeing all 22 members of the Arab League calling for the end of Hamas, demanding Hamas not just put down its weapons and stop fighting, but dissolve itself. It's a huge step. It happened in July. It's huge. This is The Mop-Up. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thank you so much for finding me. Please like this episode so I remain in your feed. A lot of you are saying you've hit the notification bell, but you still can't find my show. Maybe hit it again. Subscribe to my channel. I need to do a better job letting you know when there's a new episode. But these are some strange times right now. As I said, on Monday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with Trump inside the Oval Office. This after the White House unveiled its 21-point peace plan for Gaza that would set the stage for a Palestinian state with international peacekeepers on the ground in Gaza. The new Trump plan doesn't call for the mass relocation of all 2.1 million Palestinians left in Gaza. There's been talk of just getting rid of all the Palestinians in Gaza to make room for what Trump described earlier this year as a Middle Eastern Riviera owned by the United States, replete with luxury high-rise apartments, golf courses, and tariff-free opportunity zones to encourage international investors. Trump seems to have temporarily backed away from that obscenity, but he said if Hamas doesn't agree to this plan, they deserve what's coming to them. Trump's plan calls for a permanent ceasefire, Israeli withdrawal from Gaza in exchange for Hamas releasing the remaining hostages. Israel would be expected to release a set number of Palestinian prisoners. The stumbling block in all of this, of course, is Hamas and Benjamin Netanyahu. And if you suffered through Trump's announcement Monday, he got all tripped up trying to explain the logic behind Hamas ever agreeing to a treaty that calls for its complete dissolution. Again, how is that a negotiation? Earlier this month, again, Netanyahu ordered an airstrike on Qatar. It failed to take out Hamas's lead negotiator, but that was the intent. It's kind of hard to make a deal when you keep trying to kill all the people sitting across the table from you. Hamas, as an institution, has nothing to gain from a ceasefire since any peace deal is predicated on Hamas putting down its weapons and giving up any aspirations of being part of this new Palestinian government. And we all know that the purpose of any institution is to stay alive first. The institution comes first, and then the reason it was set up comes second. In his speech before the UN General Assembly last week, Netanyahu said the fighting will not stop until Hamas has been eliminated. He also said a two-state solution, a sovereign nation for the Palestinians, is completely off the table, promising that as long as I'm prime minister, the Palestinians will never have a homeland. And everybody walked out on him. The mistake Trump made is thinking on Monday, being delusional, thinking Netanyahu is politically compromised. Now, maybe Hamas is politically compromised. Axios and Politico reporting early Monday morning that Trump thought Netanyahu is weak inside Israel, that his coalition government is fraying, and that the United States could force him into a deal. That's what Trump deluded himself into thinking right up until Benjamin Netanyahu walked into the Oval Office on Monday. He said, yeah, fine, I'll call the Prime Minister of Qatar and apologize. And then Trump realized Trump could claim there's going to be a two-state solution and there's going to be peace, not with Netanyahu in charge. If history is any guide, like U.S. presidents before Trump, Trump is misreading Netanyahu, who tends to play along with American leaders, expressing fake interests in whatever these presidents think they're pushing him into. And then Netanyahu does exactly as he pleases. But he's pretty much upfront with American presidents. He doesn't say, okay, I'll do what you ask me. Kind of listens, nods his head, smiles, and then does what he's going to do. Netanyahu prefers being a wartime prime minister because so long as Israel is surrounded by enemies, Netanyahu's corruption trial remains on the back burner, and so do his political opponents. Netanyahu's 5-year-old corruption trial resumed this month, with Trump urging Israel's President Isaac Herzog, who serves primarily in a ceremonial role, to pardon Netanyahu. Netanyahu's charged with performing illegal political favors for wealthy donors in exchange for gifts. Netanyahu is also charged with using the power of his office to facilitate favorable media coverage from two powerful news organizations. Like Trump, Netanyahu's approval ratings are underwater as voters still demand answers as to how October 7th happened, why the hostages have not been released, and what exactly Netanyahu's endgame is. Well, his endgame is maintain power in order to avoid being forced to answer any of those other questions. The problem Netanyahu is up against is Israel arrests its leaders, unlike here in the United States. France just sentenced Sarkozy, their former president, to, I think, 5 years in prison. Other countries can survive their former leaders spending time in jail. Israel will arrest its leaders. Ehud Olmert, prime minister from 2006 to 2009, was convicted on bribery charges back in 2014. He ended up serving 16 months in prison. Olmert now saying Netanyahu is committing war crimes in Gaza. And Ehud Olmert is not the only one saying Netanyahu's committing war crimes. The International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu for crimes against humanity in Gaza. And earlier this month, the UN ruled Netanyahu is in fact guilty of genocide. Zohran Mamdani, the frontrunner in New York City's mayoral race, said if elected mayor and Netanyahu visits New York City, he would order New York City police officers to arrest Netanyahu and turn him over to The Hague in the unlikely event that New York City cops could ever get past Netanyahu's security detail. Hamas, just like Netanyahu, is fighting for political survival. Hamas is also fighting for their lives. What's going on there? Are those ice masks that Hamas is wearing? Yes, I think they're wearing ice masks, or maybe I might have doctored that. Hamas, like ice, they don't want you to see their faces. Botched nose jobs. ICE and Hamas, bad nose jobs, so they wear masks. Israel continues to take out Hamas's top leaders, leaving Hamas temporarily controlled by a committee of 5, 3 of whom live in Qatar, 1 in Turkey, and another possibly in Lebanon or Qatar. They're not sure. Up until Israel's failed attack on Hamas's lead negotiator earlier this month in Doha, Hamas leaders lived in Qatar under the approval of the United States and Benjamin Netanyahu. It was Benjamin Netanyahu's idea for Qatar to not only provide offices and a home for Hamas, but to fund them. Netanyahu and the United States wanted to keep remnants of Hamas's leadership in place in Qatar, so they had someone to negotiate with and send messages to Palestinians on the ground in Gaza should a cessation of fighting ever be agreed upon, or to negotiate the release of hostages. More importantly, Qatar financed Hamas with Benjamin Netanyahu's blessing. He openly admits he needed Hamas to rule Gaza instead of the moderate Fatah political wing of the Palestinian government. For years, Netanyahu asked Qatar to finance Hamas in Gaza to divide and conquer the Palestinian people, to make self-government next to impossible, and in so doing, convince Israelis and the American government that Israel, for security reasons, could never trust the Palestinians with their own state because of Hamas, because of Hamas's radical hold over the Palestinian government, because of Hamas's refusal to recognize Israel's right to exist. Netanyahu doesn't like Fatah because they're willing to accept Israel's right to exist. They're willing to go with a two-state solution. So Netanyahu gravitated to Hamas because they're on the same page. They're both opposed to a two-state solution. And things changed after October 7th, once Hamas raided Israel. Hamas, the monster Netanyahu didn't so much as create, but made sure was sufficiently fed, Hamas launched the single worst attack on the Jewish people since the Holocaust. Hamas has run out of friends, and it's not like the Israeli military this year lost its confidence, having seemed to pull off the impossible by destroying the Iranian-backed paramilitary Hezbollah, which for decades ruled southern Lebanon, waging war against northern Israel. They often waged that war in solidarity with Hamas. On October 7th, they fired missiles into northern Israel. Hamas, primarily Sunni. Hezbollah is Shiite. They're funded by Iran, which is Shiite. So although Hezbollah also morphed into a political wing with representatives serving in the Lebanese government, now with Hezbollah's military leadership all but wiped out in Lebanon, the Lebanese government, the Lebanese military, are working towards Hezbollah agreeing to give up its weapons. And this, at one point last year, seemed impossible, but what's left of Hezbollah's leadership there is some reporting that they are negotiating a possible surrender of their weapons. So it's not like the Israeli military is back on its heels. Much of Hezbollah's funding comes from Iran, which has become increasingly isolated and seems, at least for the time being, to be placing a lighter footprint in places like Syria, Gaza, and even Lebanon. Iran claims it never financed Hamas's October 7th invasion of Israel, but Hamas says Iran did. Iran, after October 7th, called Israel and said, "We had nothing to do with this." Iran is also fighting a proxy war in Yemen by backing Houthi fighters who, despite U.S. airstrikes in March, continue to bombard ships in the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden, and Israel. Last Wednesday, a Houthi drone fired on southern Israel, injuring 20. On Monday, Houthi missiles destroyed a Dutch container ship sailing through the Gulf of Aden. Remember the airstrikes in March that Trump called successful? Not so much. There are those who believe that despite Netanyahu's and Israel's perceived isolation on the world stage, Israel has actually cemented relations quietly with neighboring Arab states, especially Saudi Arabia, which often views Iran as their main competitor for military hegemony in this region. Things have changed vis-a-vis Saudi Arabia. 25 years ago, Saudi Arabia pushed for a Palestinian state, and there are some who believe members of the Saudi royal family financed 9/11 out of frustration with the Bush administration's failure to jumpstart peace talks between Israel and the Palestinian leadership. You might remember, I talked about this, in 2000, Clinton got Ehud Barak, the prime minister of Israel, and Yasser Arafat to come to Camp David, and they came pretty close to ironing out a two-state solution. It fell apart. That was 2000. A new intifada started. And then in 2001, George W. Bush was playing golf. He wasn't interested, and some believe that's what caused the Saudi royal family to fund 9/11. But these days, Saudi Arabia is under new management. Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, is the crown prince and prime minister of Saudi Arabia. And for all intents and purposes, he's been Saudi Arabia's dictator since 2017. And I mean, he is a dead ringer. Look at him. He looks exactly like Herschel Susskind, who I sat next to in third grade Hebrew school. How do these people know who to hate in the Middle East? How do the Jews and the Arabs know who to hate? They all look like brothers and sisters. So MBS has made, what does that say? Ye Old Bone Saw Repair Shop. Oh, I guess that's MBS stopping by Ye Old Bone Saw Repair Shop to pick up his bone saw. MBS has made it clear to the Israelis that he does want to normalize relations. And right now, there is sub rosa diplomatic relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia. It exists, all but in name only. One of the reasons Hamas is believed to have launched its October 7th attack was to prevent Israel and Saudi Arabia from ever officially becoming diplomatic and trading partners. It's also believed Iran might not have discouraged the October 7th attack because Iranian security partly depends on a wedge between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia said it would never officially become partners with Israel until Israel officially committed to a two-state solution. But over the past 5 years, MBS signaled to Israel that the Palestinians were not his responsibility. And again, he needed a partner to take on Iran, who is financing the Houthi attacks against Saudi Arabia from inside Yemen. Saudi Arabia, Sunni, Houthis, Shia. They took over Yemen, which is right up against the southern border of Saudi Arabia, and they are getting their funding from Iran, which is Shia. What does this say? This is Marco Rubio and MBS meeting. What is that? This way for the beheading? I don't know what that means. Maybe I put that in there. Who knows? After October 7th, Saudi Arabia couldn't join the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco as signatories to the Abraham Accords, which were brokered by Jared Kushner, Donald Trump's idiot son-in-law. He did that in the waning days of the first Trump administration and secured for himself billions of dollars in investments for his hedge fund. So those Arab countries, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco, they established diplomatic relations with Israel. They opened up trade, and they recognized Israel's right to exist. And despite the massacre occurring in Gaza, the Abraham Accords have held. So far, only Bahrain has recalled its ambassador. By attacking Israel, Hamas did succeed in delaying any official alliance between Saudi Arabia and Israel, and that's something Iran and Russia don't want. They do not want Israel to be aligned with Saudi. What does that say? This is MBS, and it says, you must be this tall to throw stones at the homosexual. I don't know. It must be he's at a theme park in Saudi Arabia. So, where am I? Where does this all leave the Palestinians? Well, the entire world is rooting for them, but not necessarily the leaders of the Middle East. For example, 42% of Saudi Arabia's population, they are not citizens. 42% of Saudi Arabia are migrant workers, and nearly 500,000 of those migrants are Palestinians. So with 42% of Saudi Arabia's population not citizens, Saudi Arabia lives in fear, and they see no other solution than remaining a pretty bad police state. And while dissent is dealt with swiftly in Saudi Arabia, they still have a lot of non-citizens to be afraid of, who they have to control. 42% of their population, not citizens. So Saudi Arabia opening up diplomatic relations with Israel officially would be seen as turning its back on the Palestinians, especially the Palestinians in Gaza. And that, being seen as turning your back on the Palestinians, that would create trouble on the street for the Saudi royal family, who doesn't want another Arab Spring. It's not that the Saudi royal family can't tamp down an uprising. They did it during the Arab Spring, but a tinderbox is still a tinderbox, and you just never know. You just never know. So, while Israel is despised by most of the people in the Middle East, they're not so despised by the leaders of the Middle East, some of whom privately view Israel and the United States as stabilizing forces in the region. The United States and Israel are willing to take on two problems that the rest of the Middle East doesn't want to be bothered with, and that would be Iran and the Palestinians. So, the Palestinians, there are roughly 6.5 million Palestinians living outside of Palestine, Israel, Palestine, Gaza, and the West Bank. They are spread, 6.5 million, their diaspora spreads throughout Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, the UAE, and Egypt. Jordan and Syria have been the most generous in granting some Palestinians citizenship. But throughout the rest of the Middle East, most of those 6.5 million Palestinians are seen as stateless, guest workers, or refugees. The Gulf states, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, they don't house the Palestinians in refugee camps, which are brutal. Close to 1.5 million Palestinians right now are being held in roughly 60 refugee camps throughout Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. So, it could be argued, and there are many who believe this, could be argued that Israel, among leaders in this region, Israel is seen almost as a necessary evil and a convenient scapegoat. If living conditions are intolerable for the 6.5 million Palestinians spread out across the Middle East, then Israel is to blame, not the Middle Eastern countries who host the Palestinian migrants and see these Palestinian migrants primarily as sources of cheap labor, undeserving of citizenship. Blaming Israel for the abuse of Palestinians throughout the Middle East is way more convenient than granting these Palestinians citizenship. And of course, it is Israel who expelled the Palestinians in 1948 and 1967. So in the end, Israel isn't so much the scapegoat as to there wouldn't be 6.5 million Palestinians spread out across the Middle East if Israel didn't become a state. Well, a lot of these Middle Eastern leaders are privately grateful for Israel's muscle, especially when it comes to Iran, which attempts to destabilize the region by backing primarily Shia separatists in Yemen, Syria, and Lebanon. It is Israel that often attacks and assassinates to lighten Iran's footprint in that region. So yes, massive rallies against Israel, no doubt about it. But there's also a massive gulf between what the people in the Middle East and what the leaders of the Middle East want. Same thing here in the United States and throughout the world. There's a massive gulf between what the people and what the leaders want. So, an argument could be made that while the people of the Middle East despise Israel and the United States, they also despise the United States, the leaders of the Middle East, for the most part, depend on Israel and the United States for what these leaders call stability, which is just another word. Stability is just another word for staying in power with little to no democratic freedoms. There are many moving parts and innumerable variables when it comes to the Middle East. You could spend a lifetime attempting to sort out the warring parties. So eventually what happens, most people try to follow this, and they end up relying in the end on tribalism, bigotry, resentment, religion, and racism to carve out a position to take on who's to blame and who to root for and who to root against. Well, sometimes, and I know this sounds strange, you don't need to pick a side. I mean, unless it's, locally, if it's a labor dispute, whose side are you on? You're either with management or the workers. But sometimes when you're looking at geopolitics, you don't have to pick a side. Sometimes you can spend your entire life trying to understand both sides and then try to figure out a way to accommodate them peacefully, without vitriol, without violence. That's what Jimmy Carter did when he created permanent peace between Israel and Egypt, despite everyone saying, Egypt and the Jews, those people have been fighting since the time of Moses. Egypt and Israel, permanent peace. Same with Jordan. You can do what Bill Clinton did by bringing Yasser Arafat and Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin to the table to work out the Oslo Accords, which resulted in Rabin's assassination, but it also resulted in a framework for Palestinian self-governance in the West Bank and Gaza, a framework very much still in place despite Hamas and Netanyahu trying to destroy that framework. The problem in the West Bank is the 700,000 Jewish settlers who have no intention of ceding the West Bank and are using October 7th as an opportunity to annex the West Bank. Well, Gaza is not the West Bank. It was an open-air prison before October 7th. The problem in Gaza stems partly from the United States refusing to recognize the 2006 legislative election results for the Palestinian government. This was 2006, when George W. Bush was president and spreading democracy throughout the Middle East. Right? Well, the Palestinian government, set up during the Oslo Accords, held an election. Fatah, at the time, was the ruling party. And in 2006, elections were held, and Fatah was defeated by Hamas, who won 74 of the 132 seats inside the Palestinian parliament that was set up by the Oslo Accords. It still exists. They don't meet anymore, but there's still a parliament, there's still a president of the Palestinian people, Abbas. He's Fatah. And what Abbas was supposed to do after Hamas defeated his ruling party in 2006, he was supposed to invite the leaders from Hamas to form a government. But instead, the West, Israel, George W. Bush, and Abbas, the leader of Fatah, and the president of the Palestinians, they rejected the election results. They said, no, Hamas can't win. I know we're spreading democracy throughout the Middle East, but only if we like the results. A civil war broke out between Fatah, which was the ruling party, and Hamas, which won the election in 2006. And it was a violent civil war that Benjamin Netanyahu was very happy about because it proved to his side that the Palestinians are incapable of self-governance. That's what he wanted. He wanted Fatah fighting Hamas. And he said, look, they can't govern themselves. No, they elected Hamas, and George W. Bush and Israel and Fatah, which lost the election, didn't recognize Hamas. So there was a civil war, thousands died, and by 2007, Hamas seized control of Gaza. Not through politics, but through brute force. And our imbecilic liar of a president said on Monday that the people of Gaza elected Hamas. That's misleading. That's misleading. There have been no elections for the Palestinian parliament in Gaza or the West Bank since 2006. Either we believe in democracy or we don't. Hamas won the 2006 legislative elections. In retrospect, perhaps they should have been given a chance to govern, to collect the taxes, to make sure the trash also got collected, to be responsive to its people, to be given power and authority to maintain order instead of not being allowed to govern and turning to violence. Maybe, I don't know, maybe had they been allowed to take power, they were duly elected, maybe they would have morphed into an army and declared permanent war on Israel, and it would have been a nightmare, as opposed to what we have now, which is just everything's hunky-dory. If you believe in democracy, you might want to have given Hamas a chance. They won. Give them a chance to put their weapons down. The same way Israel's terrorist organizations, the Irgun and Haganah, those were two Israeli terrorist groups, Jewish terrorist groups, who blew up the King David Hotel. They wrested control of Palestine from the British and the Palestinians. They were terrorists who became political parties once Israel became a country. Before the United States had their Federalist Party, the United States' Federalist Party was essentially George Washington's military fighting the British, although George Washington wasn't a federal, he didn't approve of parties. But that's usually the way it goes. Terrorists become, if things work out, political parties, and they put away their weapons because they now have an opportunity for state-sanctioned violence when they win elections. Sometimes they morph into political parties. Now, Fatah is a political party. They control the West Bank. They run the Palestinian Authority, even though there hasn't been an election in 2006, and they lost to Hamas. But Fatah is still a political party with its roots in Yasser Arafat's Palestinian Liberation Organization, which was a terrorist organization. Among other assaults, the PLO took credit for the Munich massacre, killing 11 members of the Israeli Olympic team back in 1972. But Yitzhak Rabin was willing to make peace with Yasser Arafat because, as they say, you don't make peace with your friends, you make peace with your enemies. And until he died, Yasser Arafat had his military wing and his political wing. And when the politics failed, he went with suicide bombings and knife attacks. In the end, the solution to all of this is politics. When politics breaks down, when people refuse to compromise, when they refuse to talk, they turn to violence. Violence is the opposite of politics. It's the end of politics. The only thing that will save Israel, the Palestinians, the people of Gaza, and all of us here in the United States is politics. Putting more faith in politics and less faith in faith. It is the religious extremists in Israel, Gaza, and here in the United States who see compromise as weakness. And so too often, many of them turn to violence. There is nobody more violent than someone who thinks God is talking to them. I don't care who you are, what religion you believe in, or which God you pray to. When you turn to violence, God is not on your side. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong, protect the weak, and politics. Politics is peace. Politics is not a dirty word. Thank you to Bob and Mila in the chat room for keeping the civilization, for keeping the conversation civil. Leave a comment if I got anything wrong. I'm covering, going into the weeds on some difficult subjects, so I triple check my facts. But if you think I got something wrong, please leave a comment. Share these episodes. I know it's getting harder and harder to find them. If you hit the notification bell and you're still not getting the alerts, hit the notification bell again, and I'll show you some other things on my next show that you might want to try. This is also an audio podcast, commercial free, that you can download wherever you get your podcasts. Going to do another show tomorrow. Thank you.